Beauty. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to shift our attention the last couple minutes here just to talking about the materials properties and really how materials and appearances work together. Because that's kind of the next kind of cool topic in terms of thinking about how all this works, is to be able to play with materials, play with the render appearances, and ultimately have them, kind of show up in the models properly. So let me go ahead and close this guy up. Cancel him away. I'll save that. And I'm going to open up a different model. If you want to open it up, it's on the coursework drive. It's the one that says Revit Building Project. Something like that. I think it's 12C or something like that. Let's go over there and let's go open up Revit Building Project. And this is actually one of the sample projects that comes with Revit. It's kind of a cool project, a lot of little interesting things going on here to take a look at. But in particular, I want to use to kind of talk about the issue of materials and rendering and visual styles, so you can start thinking about that. So every object in Revit, whether you think about it or not, has some sort of material associated with it. And if you don't bother associating anything explicitly, it gets this material called the default material, which is just kind of this gray blob, just kind of very plain, ordinary gray material. Okay? But you tend to actually want to go through and go a little bit, bit finer and control that. And you can control that material at a number of different levels. Okay? If you assign nothing at all, it's the default material. Okay? If you want to get one step further into it, you can assign a material to a category. So all the furniture pieces which don't have a specific material assigned to them have some furniture material assigned to them. Okay? Or every piece of casework has some casework material assigned to them. So things at a high level are assigned just by the types, the type category, or the categories. Okay. If you actually want to go one step further, okay, you can assign things by the individual family as a parameter. You can assign it to the type if you wanted to change for all the different types, or you can even assign it instance by instance, where every instance of it could have its own separate material. So it's really, you just got to decide where it is. The material's coming from somewhere. You just got to sometimes figure out where it is in terms of just figuring out where the association's coming. So as we go through and think about a project, and if we're not familiar with it, we want to do some exploration, you can go ahead and sort of look at some of these things. I'm going to go to the Manage tab, and the master keeper of all this material stuff we're going to talk about is right here. It's under, there's a Materials Manager. And we sort of stumbled through this a little bit last time. In the Materials Manager, there are some materials. You can either show the materials that are sort of all the projects, or we can show the ones that are sort of just in the project. These are all the materials in the project right now. Okay, so there's things like carbon steel and all that sort of stuff. If I want to add a new material, no problem, it's easy to do. Down here in the bottom, there's a library of materials, including ones which aren't necessarily in the project yet. If you want to add one to your project, you pull it on up. Let me show you how you do that. If you open up this dialog and all you see are the project materials, you can open the browser for materials by clicking this guy. And then within there, they have some things in the what's called the Autodesk Materials Library. They have some that are in the AEC Materials Library. Just two different libraries. But you can go searching around and see if you can find some stuff. So for example, if you know that you're looking for some nice teak wood, you can type teak, and it'll show you the different places in the library. You can pull that into your project. Like I said, I like teak. If you like teak, I can click this button or double click it. It'll pull it into my project. So now it's available to me. Okay, similarly, I like rubber. So I'll see if I can find some different types of rubber. I'll pull that into the project. I want some sort of grass. I'll pull that into the project. So I can pull different things into the project that way. And each of these different materials that I pull in has some properties. Let's go back to this section. Take a look at them. Every material that we pull in here, like I pulled in teak. Let me find that. It has some identity information. This is just information to describe the material. it has something called the graphics properties. The graphics properties are the ones that control how it appears in a shaded view. So any sort of 3D view that is not realistic, just shaded, showing the colors. Okay, that's how it's controlled here. It also has an appearance. Now the appearance is where it gets sort of interesting. This is where you can actually go through and choose photographs and apply bump maps to them or tint them. In this case, there's some image of what theoretically teak looks like. You can sort of see an image of what it would be wrapped on the cube, but this is actually what is wrapped around the object when we render it. Okay, and this is really kind of cool. We can create our own if we want to. For example, this is teak. It's looking pretty good. If we want to go through and create our own fabric, our own wood pattern, our own wall pattern, if you can get a nice image of it, a photograph or off of a website where we have some catalog, we can pull it in and we can associate that material with it. So for example, I could, I want to create a new material, one that I know isn't in here. I was working on a project recently. I needed to create some sort of flooring slate. Okay, some nice slate tile flooring, something like that. Turns out there's really not a great one in here. So I can take flooring slate. By default, it just has this generic appearance. Okay, not very interesting. I can go through and choose an image for it. Now, I'm going to go out and grab, I've loaded up on Coursework some background images and some material textures that you can work with. I'm just going to find it on my machine because I have it on my machine too. But where'd it go? I think I just passed it there. Rendering images, some materials textures. I have all sorts of slates and stones and marbles and stuff that I just use in my own practice. So you can grab one of these. Let's see if I can even just kind of show you the thumbnails there. And I'm going to go for, kind of this one, this very bold African multicolor.
Where do you find those?
Those are actually, you can find them on Coursework. That's just my own little collection. I just collected them just on the web. I just kept on finding them on a lot of manufacturers' websites that have those little teeny tiny like postage stamps. Yeah. Was that?
Are they specifically for Revit or
No.
pictures?
Just JPEGs. Any old JPEG. Now, when you bring in a JPEG, it'll do pretty good. You can sort of almost see how it wraps back up in here. Let me put it on like a cube. Maybe that'll be a little better. It's kind of small up there. But one thing you might need to do is edit it a little bit. Let me edit it. One thing I tend to do is I just sort of have to give it a little bit of an indication of the size. And of course it's putting in millimeters, which is not going to help me. I know that my sample, that's basically 4 feet. Let's see if it does that. Okay. Basically, those 4 squares, those are basically foot-long squares, or 12 by 12 squares. Okay. So all you're doing is really just helping it figure out what the association is. Okay. We'll say done to that. Okay, and now I have a new material that I can use. And you can go ahead and create as many materials as you want to, because you'll find it has a pretty good ones, but it doesn't have good standing seam metal. It doesn't have a lot of cool materials that you may want to use. So grab images. The best images are ones where if you're pretty square on, because you want to be able to tile them. You want to be able to kind of, figure out where the edges are. It'll repeat. So you want kind of a nice flat image. So we can create new materials. And then these materials get assigned. We create them in the materials dialog. Then they get assigned. So for example, if I want to make all the floors a certain style or a certain material, I can say object styles. Yeah, these are the materials which are assigned by default. And you find most of them aren't assigned that way. But if I want to have any floor that doesn't have a material be assigned to that, I can come to floors. It's currently assigned the default floor. If I don't want to change that instead and make that my slate floor, okay, and now any floor which doesn't have a material will automatically pick up the slate. Now, that's not the best way to do it. I tend to actually assign materials as part of the type properties. So when you're creating the wall layers and you choose a flooring material, to associate it there. So any different object, when you look at the type properties, you can map them into the materials, and then it will pick that up. Now, we'll go further with that. We'll keep on going with that, but let me kind of start talking about visual appearances, though, just so you get a sense of where we're going in terms of rendering this. Let me see if I can give you like 5 minutes on rendering just to get you started. So there's a lot of views in this model. This is a good model to play around with. Let me go to one called, oh, is it the building courtyard? I never remember which one it is. Nope. Floor public. Okay. This is kind of a view. Yeah, that kind of looks, similar to what we've been looking at right now. It has some rails, it has some stairs, it has some lighting fixtures. There's a lot of interesting things in it. But these are the types of views we've been looking at so far, right? Kind of look like a little cartoonish, stuff like that. But let's talk about how you can sort of ratchet that up and kind of change things. Okay, this view is actually something that's turned on right now. It's set to, well, let's see what it is. There's consistent colors. Consistent colors is a mode that really doesn't take into account the lighting. If something has a color, that color is presented flat. So any sort of shading that would come from the skylights or the closeness to the windows doesn't affect it at all. It's just kind of flat. Whereas if I switch over to this one, shaded, you'll see the colors change a little bit. That white on the ceiling becomes grayer because it's not going to get as much of the light as, for example, the floor. So as a starting point, shaded versus consistent is kind of an interesting distinction. If you want to go one step further, you could turn on something called realistic. And this is one where a lot of people's machines will do it. Some people's won't. It depends on your graphics card. So don't worry if you can't. It's just sort of, it's your hardware, it's not you. Let's take a look at what actually happens in that view. So again, here's consistent or shaded, stick figures, okay, all just colors. If I go to realistic, a couple different things happen. If there is a render appearance, if there is a photographic map, it'll apply it. So the carpeting has a map, the guy has a map. Looks like the railing doesn't. That's probably just a painted color. Looks like even the concrete surface of the column has a map to it. Okay, so all those things start having maps. So if there is a map available, it'll start showing you the maps, the image maps, as opposed to just doing the shading. Okay, so that gets you pretty far in terms of what's going on. Now, realistic views, I actually like to work in realistic views. It kind of pleases my eye, gives me an idea. It's a really quick way of seeing, do you have a material assigned or not? Because if you don't, it'll show up as a default gray. This is a really good first check just to see, are your materials matched up nicely? Because they should at least give you the coloration, if not the shadow and the form. It'll give you just the coloration, which is a pretty good start. Okay, we can go a little bit further in here. It turns out all these windows actually have some graphic display options, which lets you go one step further. Let me show you what those look like. You'll notice that right now, all the rails and things, you can still see the little edges, the little drawn edges to things. And if you want to turn that off, you can say, just turn off the edges, okay, and it takes them out. And this is actually starting to look a little more realistic because the world doesn't have edges as you're perceiving it in your eye. Okay, so what's happened here, it's just the little black lines around the edges of things are dropping out. So with edges, without edges. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that. We have all sorts of things going on. For example, you'll notice Mr. Guy over here has a shadow on the floor. That's probably coming from the skylight. It can cast shadows. That's all cool in terms of what's going on. In terms of the shadows, we can control that. We can say whether things should cast shadows. Actually, I'm surprised he has shadows already. Those are shadows coming from the window in the sunlight. Yes, there's a certain translucency or transparency to it, and then we can control where the sun is in the sky, so that'll change at different times of the day. Okay, so we can do that. Another type of shadow, as I'll show, that's really kind of interesting is something called an ambient shadow. Let's see if it'll do this. Not very dramatic here in terms of what's going on. Ambient shadow says that the ambient light also reflects and casts shadows too. And that tends to make things just a little softer. So it's nice. I'll show you that next time when we get together in terms of how we can go through and control that. We can also control just the whole issue of, right now the shadows are pretty strong. If I want to, like less harsh shadows, I can turn down the effect of shadowing. Okay, and it's still there, but it's just not as pronounced. That's more like a cloudy day or something like that, so we can control these things. So a lot of what we do is get materials in there and just control the visible properties here. Now the final step, and I'll show you, and this is something we will do next time just going with rendering, is say, great, This is a live model. The nice thing about this model is so far, this is all completely dynamic. So if I orbit, or if I look, whatever's happening, this is all happening in real time. Let me try this again. Full nav wheel. Let me just look over there a little bit. Yeah, that's all real time. So it's changing it very, very quick for us and stuff like that. If I want a very high quality representation, okay, that's really ray traced and gives you accurate shadows and really the fine quality stuff that you see in the finished renderings, what I need to do is do something called rendering it. You can do it quickly by just turning on something called ray trace mode. Let's see if it'll do it. It takes a little more computation. It doesn't do this so much in real time. Okay, it takes a little more work. Ray tracing goes through and it does accurate calculations for how the light's going to bounce around the space and just controls exactly how much light is hitting every surface. Okay, that's pretty gross looking right now. Let me go ahead and turn that back off and show you the way we really are going to render, because interactive ray tracing is just sort of a piece of it. When we really want to render, we turn on the rendering tool. And again, you've set up everything so it looks just the way you want it. You basically just go ahead and say that you would like to render it. We'll talk about how to control these settings at a low quality, at a draft quality, at a higher quality. But let me just get that started rendering so you get a sense. It's going through, it computes the light model, it figures out how much light's going to hit each of those different surfaces, and then it's going through. Oh, it's complaining a little bit because it couldn't find everything. Now at first it looks kind of very scary because you got a big black image. It's going through and just doing a little calculation about how much light's going to hit each of the different surfaces and how the shadows are going to cast it. But let's let it do its thing. The second pass, it's going to go through and actually start showing you the light on the surfaces.
Is the light based on electric lights or natural?
Both. So every light that you put in has sort of a certain luminance qualities, and the sunlight has luminance qualities, and it goes through and computes all those different things. I'm going to let it finish, just so that...
Put in like a light that doesn't have that quality assigned to it, or maybe you imported it and it's just...
Then we can go back and add that quality to it. Okay, and this notion of ray tracing, this is kind of a gross draft version, but this is really where we go with rendering. This is kind of a very grainy version, okay, but you'll see that what it's doing to the lighting is actually pretty good. And if we ratchet it up to a higher quality, we'll smooth out all the jaggies, we'll take care of all those things. But that's all there is to rendering in Revit. It's really, you've done a 3D model, you've assigned the materials. We basically now just need to turn on rendering, okay, and you'll get very, very good looking renderings that really look like true photographs. And this is a little bit rough, but within this we can control the sun, we control which lights we want to be, we can turn it up and be a very, very high quality rendering. Okay, so that's where we're going next.